Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. I needed to take a little bit of a long break because there's just a lot that I need to cover, and we'll get to cover before I wake up and go to work tomorrow. But that's gonna be fun. Anywho, I just, earlier today, I had finished Nightmare on Elm Street 5, which technically, Nightmare on Elm Street 5 technically takes place in I wanna say 1986, if I'm doing my math right, because think about it. If Nightmare on Elm Street takes place in 1970 or the late 1970s, like 1978, then, or like 1977, 5 years would be 1982, I think, if I'm doing my math right. Somewhere around like 1982 to 1983, depending on the time frame. Nightmare on Elm Street takes place during the first one takes place somewhere around 1977 to 1978, which means by the time we get to Freddy vs. Jason, it should be somewhere around like the late 90s, early 2000s. So that part is accurate, okay? Which also means Freddy Krueger was born around should have been born around 1937 to 1938. Jason should be around, by the time Freddy Krueger is at least around approaching like middle school, like 4th or 5th grade, Jason Voorhees is born, which means Jason Voorhees, before he is able to go to Camp Crystal Lake, he is born in 1940, around like 1947, 1948, which means both parents of both Freddy and Jason should have been born around. Freddy Krueger's mom should have been born around 1917 to 1918, which is fair. Should be fair, because that may be earlier, depending on age and whatnot, which is understandable. So Freddy Krueger's mom should have been born around the early should be born around 1910, around the 1910s roughly around the 1910s. Okay? Jason's mother, Mrs. Voorhees, should have been born around 1927 to 1928, if not somewhere in the mid or early 1920s, which would have given both parents enough time to conceive both children, both Freddy and Jason. We still don't know who Jason's father is. We do know a lot about Freddy Krueger because, one, he has to have been born around World War II or the Great Depression. He has to have been born around or during the Great Depression. And during the Second World War, which we as Americans did not enter until 1941, which is a clear indication of the time frame of when Freddy Krueger must have been born. Because if Jason died in 1957 or around 1957 to 1958, Freddy Krueger had to have been born 20 years before Jason Voorhees had died. So, which would put Freddy Krueger's birth at 1937 to 1938. Jason would have been born or should have been born at 1947 to 1948 to set each other up for their destined meeting, which would have taken place somewhere around the late 90s to early 2000s, which Freddy vs. Jason is consistently which Freddy vs. Jason is consistent upon, which means Nightmare on Elm Street 1 should take place during 1977 to 1978. Freddy Krueger started killing doing things with little kids and killing them in 1950 to when he was eventually caught in the 1960s. So he had to have died around 1966 to 1967, which would have given enough time for the kids that were born, the kids that he did not kill and turned into teens and turned teenagers. By that time, the teenagers that he kills in the whole franchise had to have been born around 1959 or 1958 to 1950 like 1958 to 1959, or 1960 to 1961, roughly, give or take. And the teenagers throughout each franchise, throughout the whole franchise of Nightmare on Elm Street, the last being his kid, which does take place during during the late 1980s, early 2000s. Late 80s, early 90s, which does seem accurate. Or seems pretty accurate. Because Freddy's Last Fright, or Freddy's Last whatever, seems kind of consistent. So that means by the events of Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1, Nightmare on Elm Street 1, the whole entire events, has to be 1977 to 1978, which means Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, takes place somewhere between 1982 to 1983. Part 3 takes some Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, takes place around 1983 to 1984. Part 4, The Dream Master, takes place during 1984 to 1985, roughly. Part 5 takes place somewhere around 1985 to 1986. Part 7 takes place during 1987 to 1987 to 1988. Part 8, Freddy Goes to Hell, I think, or Freddy Dies, or whatever the last one is called, Freddy's Last Nightmare or something like that, takes place around 1989 to 1990, maybe 1991, depending on time lapse and how many years it took. But I'm pretty confident in my analysis and my theory that by the time we get to Freddy vs. Jason, the events of Freddy vs. Jason has to have taken place around somewhere between 1999 to roughly about, give or take, 2002. Because it is stated that Freddy Krueger has been gone for years. It's not specified on how many years he's been gone, but we know that when he does eventually come back and come back into full power in Freddy vs. Jason, he starts killing again. So, which means 19 80, which means he died around 1966 to 1967, give or take. I don't know how accurate I am, but if we're looking at Robert Englund's age, makes sense. Because he was born, I think, he might have been born around that same time frame, if not later. But then again, who knows? Anyways, no, it's a very 80s movie. You know what, if you watch Nightmare on Elm Street 5, you know what to expect from Nightmare on Elm Street 5. Okay? I'm just gonna tell you there. You should already expect to know what you're dealing with Nightmare on Elm Street 5. Like, just like, same thing with Friday the 13th franchise, or the Halloween franchise, which, must I say anything about that franchise? No, it's definitely 80s. I'll give it that. It is definitely 80s. It is filled with 80s crap. Not saying that stuff from the 80s was entirely crap. We had some pretty decent movies and some interesting TV shows out of the 80s. Same thing with the 90s. But love them, hate them, we can't get enough of them. Whether you're feeling nostalgic for 80s pop culture, 90s pop culture, 70s pop culture, that's just the sort of stuff you had to expect to be watching and coming out in the 1980s. I mean, then again, I wasn't born in the 1980s. My parents were. I was just born in 1996. I mean, what can I say? Anywho, that's all I have for you guys so far. For right now, please like, share, subscribe, and have a good day. Thanks. Bye.